Sergeant Daniela Ross thought she understood fear. In every deployment, she'd seen the worst humanity could offer. Snipers in hidden windows, landmines buried in unsuspecting roads, warlords who held entire villages captive. Yet nothing prepared her for the phone call she received at midnight. Her grandmother, a retired librarian in Belhaven County, was behind bars on charges so outrageous they sounded like fiction. But in Belhaven, fiction often disguised reality. A corrupt power broker had just committed a fatal error, targeting a quiet elder who raised a warrior. And when a decorated black female soldier returns to her hometown to free the woman who taught her about justice, the crooked system is about to learn that some battles are won before they even begin. Just before we dive in, let me know where you're watching this from, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Daniela Ross stepped off the Greyhound bus at Belhaven Station under a sky bruised with dawn. She hadn't set foot in this town for 4 years. Her last memory was a tearful farewell at the very same terminal, her grandmother hugging her tight before she flew to her overseas post. Once upon a time, Belhaven's wide streets felt comforting. The porch swings and blooming magnolia trees had seemed like postcards of American life. Now each silent block felt like a stage waiting for confrontation. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the local folks who trickled into the station's waiting area. Some recognized her. She could see it in their uncertain nods and uneasy glances. Her name had once circulated in local papers when she graduated top of her class at West Point, then soared through Army Ranger School before earning a special assignment. Now at 36, she was a living legend to some, an unknown threat to others. A tall, lean woman with skin the color of rich cocoa and eyes that had seen things no one should have to see. Beneath her civilian jacket, the muscle memory of countless drills kept her posture razor straight. "Over here," a voice called, hesitant but trying to be cheerful. Marta Ellis, an old family friend who ran Belhaven's only diner, stood beside her truck. She was maybe 55, her eyes kind but tinged with worry. She'd offered to pick Daniela up at the station the moment she heard the sergeant was coming home. Daniela slung her rucksack over her shoulder and approached, forcing a small smile. "Thank you for doing this. I know it's early." Marta's expression wavered between relief and heartbreak. "You know I'd do anything for your grandmother, honey. She helped me get my first library card when I was just a kid, taught me how to read. This whole situation it's insane." Daniela clenched her jaw. Insane barely covered it. 3 days ago, she got the call no granddaughter expects. Her grandmother, Loretta Ross, 71, proud, meticulously honest, had been arrested for grand larceny of all things. The official story claims she stole precious historical documents from the county archives, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars on the antiquities market. Loretta Ross, who'd worked as the county librarian for almost 40 years, who believed in preserving every piece of local history as if it were her own child, accused of stealing antique land deeds. It was laughable, if it weren't so brazen. As Marta drove Daniela through town, the early sun casting long shadows across the modest storefronts, the soldier noted the changes. Boarded-up shops where local businesses had once thrived, a brand-new office building that clashed with the old architecture, construction sites with chain-link fences, encroaching on older neighborhoods, historically home to the black community. "What's with all the construction?" Daniela asked, her voice low. Marta grimaced. "A real estate mogul named Alexander Pierce has been buying up properties for over a year now, calling it Belhaven Renaissance. He's convinced half the city council to believe it's progress. The other half either got paid off or are too scared to speak out. Most folks who can't afford higher property taxes end up selling for peanuts, or simply getting evicted. That new office building? Pierce's headquarters." Daniela inhaled slowly. She'd caught glimpses of corruption in her service, usually in war-torn places where bribes were the main currency. Seeing it unfold in her grandmother's backyard felt like a personal insult. Marta drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. "Your grandmother was the last to stand against him on a big chunk of land that used to be farmland for the black families who settled here generations ago. She had the original documents proving it was donated to the community. She didn't want it sold off for a shopping mall. Then suddenly those documents vanish from the archives, and next thing we know, she's locked up. Her voice cracked. Is she still in the county jail? Yes. I went to see her yesterday. Her bail hearing got delayed 3 times. Some nonsense about an overflow docket. But everyone knows it's all orchestrated. She's too proud to accept a plea deal, obviously. She's been fighting for the truth alone. Marta sighed. Until now. Daniela felt her temples tighten. She had cut her combat tour short the moment she heard. High-level connections in the military had helped expedite her emergency leave. Her superiors had looked at her trembling hands and the tears in her eyes, tears she rarely showed, and understood something deeper than duty was calling her home. As the truck rolled past the county courthouse, Daniela spotted 2 men in suits handing out flyers to passers-by. A large sign behind them read, "Pierce for mayor, vote for progress." He's going into politics too? She asked Marta. That's the rumor, Marta said. Not just rumor, actually. He's announced his run for mayor in the next election. Says he wants to transform Bellhaven into a modern cultural hub. Meanwhile, old families are losing their heritage, especially in your grandmother's neighborhood. A sour taste filled Daniela's mouth. She'd run reconnaissance missions in enemy territory less toxic than this. They pulled up to a diner lit by a flickering neon sign that read, Marta's Home Cookin'. She parked around back, killed the engine, and turned to Daniela. I'll make you something to eat. Then we'll head to the station together, try to see Loretta. Daniela nodded. I appreciate it. Let's make it quick. Inside the diner, the smell of fresh biscuits and sizzling bacon would normally feel comforting, but her mind was racing too fast to think about breakfast. A line cook in the back and a teenage waitress at the counter both offered polite nods. As Daniela sank into a booth, she noticed the hush that fell over the customers, a handful of older folks sipping coffee, 2 truckers finishing up an early meal. They recognized her. Perhaps they'd seen her name in the local paper when she left for the army, or maybe they saw her grandmother's face on the 6 o'clock news. Marta brought a plate of scrambled eggs and grits, plus toast slathered in butter. Daniela forced herself to eat. She needed her strength. You want me to come with you to the station? Marta asked gently. No, you have to keep this place running, Daniela said, swallowing a bite. I'll handle it. Marta nodded, relief mixing with concern. She knew that if anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was Sergeant Ross. When Daniela finished, she thanked Marta and headed out on foot to the Bellhaven Police Department. The building was a mid-century brick structure that had seen better days, but the front steps were immaculate, decorated with red, white, and blue bunting, as if that could distract from the tension brewing inside. As she walked into the lobby, she caught the immediate hush of conversation. 3 uniformed officers at the reception area turned to stare. One, a balding man with a mustache, approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Morning, ma'am. Can I help you? I'm here to see Loretta Ross. She's my grandmother. She's being held on charges of grand larceny. Daniela kept her tone even. The officer raised an eyebrow. Are you her lawyer? Daniela studied his name tag. Officer Dillon. The name rang no bells. I'm her family, and I'm also an Army Ranger, but I suspect that's less relevant to you. I want to see her. He shifted his stance. Visitation is restricted at the moment. Ms. Ross was just moved to a holding cell while we process some paperwork. It was clear he was feeding her a line. Daniela had been in enough negotiation scenarios to read someone's body language in seconds. His too wide stance, the twitch of his fingers near his belt, the forced smile. He was tense, expecting trouble. Your paperwork must be awfully complex to keep a 71-year-old librarian in a holding cell, she said softly. And if you're restricting visits, you must have a reason. Mind telling me what that is? He hesitated. A door opened behind him and another officer stepped out. Shorter, stockier, with dark hair slicked back. He wore a lieutenant's insignia and had a scowl permanently etched into his face. Sergeant Benton, the receptionist introduced. Sergeant Benton gave Daniela a cold once over. This is a private matter, Ms. Sergeant Ross, she corrected him, offering a tight smile. United States Army. I'm Loretta Ross's granddaughter. I'm here to see her. Benton snorted. Army, huh? Thought you'd be bigger. He was trying to rile her up. She kept her composure. Size didn't matter when you knew 15 ways to disarm a man. We come in all shapes and sizes. Now, if you'd kindly let me see my grandmother, we won't waste any more of each other's time. Benton glanced at Officer Dillon, who shuffled uncomfortably, then turned back to Daniela. I'm afraid Ms. Ross is in a closed wing. No visitors allowed until after her arraignment tomorrow. That's not what I was told, Daniela said, ice creeping into her voice. Her arraignment was supposed to be this morning, so why is it suddenly postponed until tomorrow? Overcrowded docket, Benton said in a bored tone. The soldier in her recognized a pattern: stalling, redirecting, intimidation. Everything about their attitude suggested they were under orders to keep Loretta inaccessible. Daniela leaned closer, dropping her voice so only Benton could hear. Listen, Sergeant. If there's a legitimate reason for me not to see her, I'll respect the law. But if you're playing games, I promise you I can make your next few weeks very uncomfortable. I'm not just some grunt. I have friends in the Pentagon, the Department of Justice, and federal agencies that can shine a very bright light on Bellhaven PD. So, do we do this the easy way or the hard way? Benton's cheeks reddened. For a split second, Daniela thought he might lash out. Instead, he forced a harsh laugh. Give us a few minutes. We'll see what we can do about a brief visit. She nodded. I'll wait. He marched off, presumably to consult with someone higher up, or maybe to call that someone and figure out how to handle a meddling Army Ranger. Officer Dillon remained behind the desk, avoiding eye contact. Minutes ticked by. Daniela let her gaze roam around the station's waiting area. A poster on the wall depicted the new mayoral race. Alexander Pierce's face stared back at her. Clean cut, maybe mid-40s, with a slogan beneath, Building Tomorrow's Bellhaven. The bullet points promised increased revenue, new businesses, safe neighborhoods. Beside that poster was another notice about historic preservation efforts, ironically sponsored by Pierce. The hypocrisy was nauseating. Finally, Benton reemerged. Follow me. He led her down a corridor that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. At the end of it was a metal door with a reinforced window. Benton unlocked it, gesturing her inside a small visitation room with a partition of plexiglass down the center. You have 5 minutes, he muttered, then stepped out, shutting the door behind him. Loretta Ross sat on the other side, wearing a county-issued jumpsuit that looked ridiculous on her graceful frame. Her silver hair was tucked behind her ears, and her dark eyes still shone with the same fierce intelligence Daniela remembered, but her shoulders slumped in exhaustion, and bruises marked her wrists where handcuffs had chafed her. Granddaughter and grandmother locked eyes. Loretta's lips trembled in a relieved smile. Daniela picked up the phone receiver on her side of the plexiglass. Loretta did the same. Oh, my sweet girl, I'm so sorry you had to come back to this, Loretta whispered, fighting tears. Daniela's heart clenched. Grandma, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. Are you hurt? She shrugged. I've been treated decently, except for the bruising they gave me when they arrested me. Claimed I resisted. I've never resisted a thing in my life other than injustice. But they can't keep me here forever, can they? Daniela clenched her jaw. I'm getting you out. We'll challenge these charges. Prove you were framed. Marta told me everything about those land deeds. That's what this is about, right? Loretta nodded. Alexander Pierce. He wants that farmland behind the old library. I have copies of the original deeds, but I also had the official ones in the library's archive. Then, out of nowhere, those documents supposedly vanish. Next day, an anonymous tip accuses me of selling them on the black market. Ridiculous. Daniela's fury simmered. Any evidence of who's behind the tip? No, Loretta said, but I caught one of Pierce's cronies snooping around my library office weeks back. I confronted him. He gave me a condescending smile and said, Progress can't be stopped, Miss Loretta. Soon after that, we found out the deeds were missing. The police claimed to find paper fragments linking me to a forgery ring. Absolute nonsense. Grandma, do you have any allies on the inside? Anyone you trust in the county government? Loretta's eyes flickered. There's one young attorney, Lisa Monroe, who used to volunteer at the library. She's been trying to fight for me, but they keep shutting her down. She doesn't have the political clout to go up against Pierce's people. Daniela placed a palm on the plexiglass. We'll do this together. I have resources too. We'll bring 'em down. A tear slipped down Loretta's cheek. You're so much like your parents. Brave, stubborn, determined. Just be careful. Pierce is wealthy, connected, and he's got half the cops in this town under his thumb. Benton's voice crackled through the speaker. Time's up, Sergeant. Daniela exhaled. I love you, Grandma. Hang in there. Love you too, baby. Loretta pressed her hand against the glass where Daniela's rested, a mirrored gesture separated by a cold barrier. Then she rose, her chin held high, and allowed an officer to escort her away. Daniela stepped back into the hallway, glaring at Benton. This isn't over. He chuckled. Sergeant, folks like you come and go. Bellhaven has its own ways of handling business. Good luck. Before she could respond, he pivoted and walked away. Outside the station, Daniela paused on the steps, inhaling the crisp morning air. Overhead, a pair of crows circled like omens. She clenched her fists. Her grandmother was locked up because she tried to protect land that rightfully belonged to the community's earliest black settlers. She needed legal help, publicity, maybe federal oversight. But first, she needed a place to plan. Marta's Diner was one option, but that was too public. She decided to book a room at the local motel to set up a makeshift command center. She'd coordinate calls to higher-ups, gather evidence, and build a strategy. As she reached the sidewalk, a voice called from behind. Sergeant Ross! She turned to see a tall, wiry man in plain clothes, late 50s maybe, with peppered hair. He extended a hand politely. I'm Detective Troy Maxwell. I've known your grandmother a long time. Mind if I speak to you for a moment? Daniela studied him. He didn't wear a Bellhaven PD uniform. You're not local force? State-level detective. I was seconded here on a special project, but I've come to see the bigger picture. He glanced around, lowered his voice. Loretta Ross is innocent, and everyone with half a brain in that building knows it. Then why is she still in jail? Daniela demanded, eyes narrowing. Politics, money. Pierce has been funneling funds into local campaigns, including the sheriff's re-election war chest. Your grandmother is standing in his way, so they're making an example out of her. Daniela's pulse quickened. You want to help me prove it? Yes, but carefully, Maxwell said. I've tried to open official inquiries, but every time I do, my superiors shut it down. They claim no probable cause. We need real evidence, something we can't ignore. Think you can get it? That's why I'm here, she answered. His gaze flicked across her army jacket, the patches indicating she was more than just an average soldier. I heard stories about you, Sergeant. The kind that make people uneasy. They say you specialized in intelligence, infiltration. That so? She shrugged. I did what needed to be done. If you can keep me informed from the inside, I'll do the rest. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then you've got yourself a friend on the force. He handed her a folded piece of paper. My burner number. If you need me, call. And be careful who else you trust. This place is a maze of loyalties. She tucked the number into her pocket. Thanks, Detective. He nodded and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. But at least one thing was clear. She wasn't alone in this fight. When she reached the nearby motel, she paid cash for a 2-night stay under a different name. Old habit from the field. The desk clerk, a drowsy college kid, barely registered her presence. She marched upstairs to a shabby little room that smelled of disinfectant and stale cigarettes, but it had a table and decent Wi-Fi, enough for her to set up a laptop and phone. Someone who owed her a favor. She left a simple message. Need info on a Bellhaven local figure. Alexander Pierce. Big money, suspicious deals, anything you have. Then she fired off another to Lisa Monroe, the attorney her grandmother mentioned, asking if they could meet today to discuss the case. An hour later, her phone buzzed, a text from Captain Myers. Working on it, heard rumors about Pierce, possibly linked to shady real estate developments in multiple counties. We'll keep you posted. Good. Now she just needed to connect the dots. She pulled up public records online, searching for property acquisitions in Belhaven over the past 2 years under any shell company or LLC that might link back to Pierce. If her hunch was correct, he'd left a trail. The door rattled with a knock. Daniela tensed, reflexively reaching toward her belt, as if a sidearm would be there. She'd turned in her Army-issued firearm before leaving base, and while she considered picking one up legally in Belhaven, she decided to wait. Didn't want to give local cops an excuse to label her armed and dangerous. She moved to the door, peering through the peephole. Lisa Monroe stood outside. Tall, slender, with short braids pinned behind her head, she wore a dark suit that looked a bit frayed at the cuffs, probably from countless courthouse battles. Daniela opened the door. "Lisa?" "Yes, hi." Lisa offered a quick smile. "Your text said you wanted to speak about Ms. Loretta Ross. Can I come in?" Daniela stepped aside, letting Lisa enter. The attorney took in the cramped space, eyebrows raised, but said nothing. "Thanks for coming," Daniela said. "Can I get you anything? Water?" "I'm good," Lisa replied, setting her briefcase down. "I'm here to help your grandmother in any way I can. But I've hit walls at every turn. Judges are recusing themselves or stalling the hearing. The district attorney's office claims they have compelling evidence. I can't even get a full copy of the supposed forensic report on the stolen documents." She exhaled sharply. "I suspect Pierce is calling all the shots." Daniela leaned against the dresser. "We need a plan to blow this open. Something that forces a state or federal investigation, so that local alliances can't bury the truth. I have a detective on my side, but we need more than word of mouth. We need a smoking gun linking Pierce to the disappearance of those deed documents and the false charges against my grandmother." Lisa nodded. "I know a whistleblower, one of Pierce's employees who works in his office downtown. She hinted she had inside information, but after we spoke once, she vanished, disconnected her phone, moved out of her apartment. I'm worried she might have been threatened or bought off." Daniela's heart thudded. "Any clue how to contact her?" "Not anymore. I have her name and a partial email address she used to message me. Her name is Ebony Warner. She's about 23, fresh out of college. She started as an administrative assistant for Pierce 6 months ago. Saw some things she shouldn't have, apparently." "All right, Ebony Warner. That's a lead." Daniela grabbed a notepad and jotted down the name. "What else do you know about Pierce's operation? Does he have private security, or do local cops do his bidding?" "A bit of both," Lisa replied. "He has a private security firm on retainer, Links Protection, ex-military types, armed guards, that sort of thing. Then there's the sheriff's department, which is effectively at his beck and call." Daniela recognized that name, Links Protection. She'd heard rumors they hired mercenaries who learned their trade in the Middle East or Africa. Skilled, possibly dangerous, she'd have to be cautious. Their conversation stretched on. Lisa revealed how Pierce had systematically bought out land in Belhaven's historically black neighborhoods. He'd used skyrocketing taxes, code enforcement violations, or shady bank appraisals to drive people out. Then he'd swoop in, offering them a fraction of what the property was worth. Those who resisted faced arrests or intimidation. When Ms. Loretta refused to budge, Lisa concluded, he found another approach. And here we are. Daniela ground her teeth. "He's messing with the wrong woman. My grandmother is the backbone of this community, and I won't stand for his corruption." Lisa's eyes shone with admiration. "I've tried to rally local support, but fear is powerful. Most folks think going against Pierce means losing everything. They just want to survive." Daniela nodded grimly. "We need to show them he's not invincible. If we expose him, the entire structure collapses. But we'll need help from outside Belhaven. Can you file motions to request a change of venue for Grandma's hearing? Maybe push for a federal look at the case?" "I'll try," Lisa said. "But the judge assigned to her case is known for ruling in Pierce's favor. That's Judge Hamilton. I filed a recusal motion, but it got denied. I can keep filing, but it might take too long." "Do whatever it takes," Daniela urged. "I'll handle the rest. Also, gather statements from anyone else Pierce targeted. We can compile a pattern of harassment." Lisa nodded and rose, straightening her suit. "I'll get to work." Watch your back, Sergeant Ross. Pierce doesn't play fair. Daniela escorted her to the door. Neither do I when it comes to protecting family. Lisa left. Daniela paced the room, adrenaline surging. She needed Ebony Warner, the whistleblower. If Ebony had documents or recordings from inside Pierce's empire, that could be the key. But Ebony had vanished. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Captain Mayers. Pierce flagged in multiple states for suspicious development deals, alleged ties to private security with violent tactics. No official convictions. We'll keep digging. So it wasn't just Belhaven. This was a pattern. One man wreaking havoc across multiple communities, carefully covering his tracks. She typed back, "Thanks. Need more specifics if possible." Then she set the phone aside, deciding she had to do some field work. She changed into a plain black t-shirt, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes, ideal for blending in or running if she had to. Then she left the motel by the back exit, scanning the parking lot. Satisfied no one was trailing her, she walked 3 blocks to a local newspaper office, the Belhaven Post. If anyone was following the real estate fiasco, a reporter might be. Inside, she found a modest reception area leading to a warren of cubicles. A bored receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone who's covered Alexander Pierce's real estate dealings. Anyone on staff?" She braced for another brush-off, but the receptionist perked up. "You mean Jason Collins? He's our investigative reporter." "Perfect. Is he in?" "His desk is second row near the window." Daniela nodded her thanks. She navigated the cramped walkway to a desk overflowing with papers, half-empty coffee cups, and a laptop with multiple sticky notes plastered around it. A young man in his early 30s typed feverishly, not even glancing at her until she cleared her throat. "Jason Collins?" He looked up, and behind glasses perched on a narrow face, his eyes lit with curiosity. "Yes? I'm Sergeant Daniela Ross. I'd like to talk to you about Alexander Pierce and his involvement in my grandmother's arrest." Jason's gaze flicked to her army patch, half hidden by her t-shirt sleeve. He gestured to a spare chair. "Sure, have a seat." He minimized the screen on his computer. "You said your grandmother was arrested? I might have heard something about that. Loretta Ross, the librarian, right?" "Yes, she's innocent." Jason nodded. "People around town are whispering that this is another land grab by Pierce. I've been digging, but no one wants to go on the record. The last 2 property owners who tried to speak up ended up losing their homes in some legal tangle." They clammed right up. Daniela inhaled. "I don't scare easily, and I won't be silent. If I give you a story, what do you need to run it?" "Evidence," he said. "Something bulletproof. Right now everything's alleged or rumored. My editor's worried about defamation lawsuits. If we publish accusations without solid proof, Pierce's lawyers will bury us." "And if you had proof that Pierce orchestrated the theft of archived documents to frame my grandmother?" Jason leaned forward, excitement flickering. "Then I'd run the biggest expose Belhaven has seen in decades. If we go public, that might spark a state investigation Pierce can't hush. Possibly federal if it crosses state lines, but..." He spread his hands. "Without that, we're stuck." Daniela nodded. "Keep an ear to the ground. I'm working on it. Once I have something real, you'll get it." "Deal?" "Deal," he said, sincerity in his voice. "Just watch out for Pierce's men. They're not above intimidation. There was an incident last month. My tires got slashed after I published a minor piece about code violations at one of his buildings. The police labeled it vandalism. No suspects found." Her jaw tightened. "Thanks for the warning." If Ebony was in hiding, maybe a friend or relative knew where. Lisa had only known Ebony for a short time, but maybe Ebony's social media or old address could give clues. Daniela returned to her motel and started combing the internet. Ebony had a LinkedIn profile. Bare bones, just mentioning she was an administrative assistant for AP Development, Pierce's main company. She'd once posted about her hometown, Westlake, a smaller city about an hour away. Possibly she had family there. A quick White Pages search revealed 3 Ebony Warners in the state. One was 60 years old, one a minor, and one, age 23, in Belhaven. matching the birth month Lisa gave. Her last known address was in a neighborhood near the outskirts of town. Perfect. Daniela grabbed her keys and set out. Ebony's last known address sat in a part of Bellhaven that had once been farmland, now dotted with cheaply built apartment complexes. Daniela cruised the street, noticing windows boarded up, overflowing dumpsters and graffiti. Not exactly safe territory, but she'd patrolled worse overseas. She found the building number, 709. She climbed the creaking wooden stairs to the second floor, then walked down a dingy hallway until she reached apartment 207. She knocked. No answer. A neighbor stepped out from the adjacent unit, a middle-aged woman in a bathrobe, squinting at her. "Excuse me," Daniela said politely. "Do you know if Ebony Warner still lives here?" The woman snorted. "She left 2 weeks ago. Some men in suits came by, looked official, then she packed up overnight, didn't say where she was going. Any clue where she might have gone? Did she have friends, family around?" The neighbor shrugged. "Not that I know of. She was quiet, always working, good kid. Hope she's all right. This place ain't safe for anyone these days." Daniela thanked her, then turned to leave, heart sinking. Ebony had indeed disappeared in a hurry. She scanned the hall, noticing a battered security camera near the stairwell. Maybe it recorded Ebony's departure, or the men who spooked her. But it probably belonged to the apartment management, likely worthless, or the footage was erased. She lingered near the camera, tapping it lightly. A small red LED glowed. If it was operational, maybe there was a chance. She left, heading to the complex manager's office. The manager, an older man with a scruffy beard, refused to release any footage without a court order. She could guess how well that request would go with local judges under Pierce's influence. Back in her car, she gripped the steering wheel. Another dead end. Ebony was the single strongest lead to tie Pierce directly to the forging and disappearance of the county deeds. Without her testimony, it was all circumstantial. As Daniela pulled out of the parking lot, a dark SUV slid in behind her, following at a distance. She noticed it in her rearview mirror. Tinted windows, no front plate. Suspicious. She'd learned to detect a tail in her overseas missions. She took a left turn onto a side street, then an immediate right. The SUV followed. A flicker of adrenaline sparked in her gut. She couldn't lead them back to the motel. Instead, she increased speed, weaving through residential blocks. The SUV stayed close. She considered losing them entirely, but she wasn't fully familiar with Bellhaven's new layout. One wrong turn, she could get cornered. Suddenly, the SUV accelerated and pulled alongside her on a deserted stretch. The passenger window rolled down. A man with a shaved head, wearing dark sunglasses, glared at her. Without warning, he swerved toward her, forcing Daniela to veer off the pavement. She narrowly missed a telephone pole, her tires screeching. She slammed the brakes, cursing. The SUV sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and burnt rubber behind. She steadied her shaking hands on the steering wheel. They hadn't tried to kill her, just scare her. A little welcome home from Pierce's security, no doubt. It only solidified her resolve. She made a mental note of the partial plate number. Maybe Detective Maxwell could help track it. She reversed onto the road, checking the car's alignment. No major damage, thank goodness, and continued on a winding route back to the motel. Inside her room, she slumped into a chair, her mind spinning with 100 questions. She replayed each event: her grandmother's wrongful arrest, Ebony's disappearance, the intimidation tactics. This was a complex operation. Pierce had money, muscle, and local authority. But Daniela had training, determination, and a grandmother whose dignity was worth more than any price. That evening, she pored over documents Lisa had emailed. Property records, partial statements from families who'd been forced out, references to code violations suspiciously signed by the same inspector who rarely found fault with Pierce's own developments. The pattern of harassment was clear. A beep from her phone signaled an incoming text. "Detective Maxwell, need to see you. Have info on Ebony. Lobby of the Majestic Hotel, 9 p.m. Come alone." Suspicion flared. Why the Majestic Hotel? That was the fanciest place in Bellhaven. Pierce's favorite venue for business dinners. Could be a trap, But if Maxwell had something about Ebony, Daniela had to risk it. She stashed her notes, slipped on a hooded jacket, and left. The Majestic's lobby glowed with golden chandeliers. Polished marble floors reflected the well-heeled clientele drifting through. Daniela kept her hood low, scanning for Maxwell. She spotted him by a large potted palm, hands in his pockets, looking tense. She approached. "Detective?" He gave a curt nod. "We should talk somewhere quieter." He led her to a corner with plush chairs and a coffee table, away from the main bustle. She sat, noticing his posture was stiff, like a man carrying fear. "What's going on?" she asked, voice low. Maxwell checked over his shoulder. "I found Ebony. She reached out to me earlier. She's hiding in a safe house outside city limits, terrified. She has evidence. Emails, voice recordings. They prove Pierce orchestrated the theft of county documents and paid off officials to blame your grandmother." Daniela's heart leapt. "So we can exonerate Grandma?" "If Ebony is willing to testify, absolutely." He swallowed. "But she won't come out of hiding unless she trusts we can protect her. She's been threatened. She thinks her phone is bugged. Maybe her family is under surveillance. I offered to place her in a protective program, but I don't have that jurisdiction. We'd need the feds. Problem is, the feds need a reason to come in. Catch-22. Daniela's jaw tightened. "What if I get someone from the DOJ or FBI to do an initial interview with Ebony? That could trigger an official inquiry, leading to protective status." Maxwell exhaled. "That might work. But Ebony's spooked. She wants to meet you, see if you're legit. If she's convinced, maybe she'll hand over the files. Then you can pass them to your contacts. Blow this wide open." "Where and when?" She said tomorrow night. "The safe house is a cabin near Lake Bowman, about 30 miles north. It's remote. She's using a false name at a rundown lodge. She wants to meet at midnight. Less chance of onlookers." Daniela recognized the risk of a midnight rendezvous in a remote place, but Ebony's testimony was crucial. "I'll be there," she said. "Text me the coordinates. Let Ebony know I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Maxwell shifted. "There's more. Pierce is on to me. I saw men watching my house. I can't guarantee my phone isn't tapped, so be careful with communications. Use burner phones, if you have them." She nodded. "Understood." He stood. "Stay alert, Sergeant Ross. Once Pierce realizes Ebony's still in the area with tangible evidence, he'll escalate. And watch out for Benton at the station. He's thick as thieves with Pierce." Daniela shook Maxwell's hand, feeling the weight of the next step. She left the Majestic swiftly, scanning for any tail. None obvious. She circled back to her motel by a back route, the tension in her muscles unrelenting. She spent the next day finalizing plans. She called Lisa Monroe, telling her she might soon have definitive proof of Loretta's innocence. Lisa was ecstatic, but worried. "Be cautious," she urged. "If Ebony's captured by Pierce's men, we lose everything." At 10 p.m., Daniela left her motel, driving a borrowed car from Marta's diner staff. She wanted to avoid being recognized in her own vehicle. She carried only essentials: phone, a flashlight, a digital recorder, and a pocket knife. The Army had trained her well in how to adapt. The moon was high by the time she neared Lake Bowman, its silver reflection dancing on the water's surface. Thick pines loomed, casting shadows across the narrow road. She found a gravel driveway leading to a small cluster of cabins. She parked, killed the headlights, and made her way on foot. A lone cabin at the far end had a faint glow from a single lamp. She knocked softly. The door cracked open, and Detective Maxwell peered out, relief washing over his face. Inside, Ebony Warner stood near a fireplace. She was petite, with wide, fearful eyes, clutching a laptop case. "You're Sergeant Ross?" Ebony asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," Daniela said gently. "I'm here to help." Maxwell closed the door behind her. The cabin was sparse. A couch, a table, some mismatched chairs, a battered fridge humming in the corner. Ebony looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. She gestured to the laptop case. "I have files, emails, showing Pierce told an associate to remove certain deeds from the county archives. I have audio from a meeting where Pierce laughs about framing your grandmother. There's also a ledger of bribes he paid to local officials. I copied everything before I left the office. That's why I ran. I knew they'd come after me. Daniela's pulse pounded. This was the break they needed. Ebony, that's incredible. I can share this with federal contacts and the press. We can get you protection. But we have to move fast. Ebony nodded, tears brimming. I just want this nightmare to end. Ms. Loretta was the only one at the library who treated me like I mattered. I can't let her go down for something she didn't do. Maxwell stepped forward. We should leave Bellhaven tonight, drive Ebony to a safe location, maybe out of state, then give the evidence to the feds. Daniela considered. We'll need to ensure no one follows us. Pierce probably has watchers at all major roads, but it's doable. Ebony, are you up for traveling now? She opened her mouth to reply, but the sound of crunching gravel outside froze them. Headlights swept across the cabin windows. A vehicle. Or multiple vehicles. Maxwell cursed under his breath. Ebony's hand flew to her mouth. Daniela moved to the window, parting the curtain a fraction. 2 black SUVs and a police cruiser, lights off, had pulled up. Doors opened, men stepped out. At least 5, plus a silhouette in the driver's seat of the cruiser. Pierce's security, Daniela whispered. They found us. Maxwell pulled out his phone. I'll call for backup. But after a moment, he frowned. No signal. They must have a jammer, or it's just poor coverage. Ebony trembled. We're trapped. Daniela scanned the small cabin. 1 door, no obvious back exit, just windows. We can't fight them head on. We need to slip out the back window and vanish into the woods. Maxwell nodded. We have to. They'll break in any minute. They grabbed Ebony's laptop case. Daniela checked the window in the bedroom, barely large enough to climb through, but it would have to do. She quietly slid it open. The night air rushed in, smelling of pine and lake water. She turned to Ebony. I'll go first, then you pass me the laptop. Maxwell, you follow. Ebony handed the case to Daniela. She hoisted herself up and out, landing softly in the damp grass. Ebony followed, pushing through with Maxwell's help. Her breath came in ragged gulps. Then Maxwell climbed out last. In the distance, the front door handle rattled. A barked order. Come out, Ebony, you have nowhere to run. Daniela crouched low, motioning Ebony and Maxwell to follow. They scrambled behind the cabin, staying close to the shadows of tall trees. The cars were on the other side, which gave them a short head start. You see a trail? Maxwell whispered, shining a dim flashlight. Daniela's combat instincts kicked in. She scanned the ground. Slight path heading into thicker woods, probably a fisherman's route. This way, she hissed, leading them. Behind them came the splintering of wood as the cabin door was kicked in, followed by cursing. Then voices shouting, They escaped out the window, spread out! Ebony whimpered, and Daniela pressed a reassuring hand to her shoulder. Stay calm. Keep moving. They plunged into the woods, branches scratching their arms, the ground uneven. The darkness felt claustrophobic, but it was their ally. Lack of moonlight under the thick canopy meant anyone following would be just as blind. Another voice echoed through the trees. We know you're out here. Surrender and no one gets hurt. Liar, Ebony muttered bitterly. Maxwell glanced back, his face etched with worry. We'll have to find a place to hide or circle back to the road on the far side of the lake. Daniela nodded. Let's keep them guessing. Move quietly. For 15 tense minutes they navigated the undergrowth, hearing occasional shouts behind them. Once, a flashlight beam grazed past on their right, forcing them to crouch until it vanished. Finally, they stumbled upon a narrow deer trail leading to a small clearing. The sound of running water suggested a stream ahead. Daniela paused, listening. The men's voices were distant now, but dogs barking in the distance alarmed her. They'd brought K9 units? Maxwell cursed. We have to lose our scent. The stream might help. They hurried forward, stepping into the shallow water. It was icy, swirling around their ankles, but it masked their footprints and scent. Ebony clung to the laptop bag like a lifeline. As they moved downstream, the dog's barks drew closer, but the water helped mask the trail. Eventually, the barks faded. Daniela exhaled in relief. Ebony's teeth chattered from cold and nerves, so Maxwell wrapped his jacket around her. "Thank you," she whispered. They waited, for what felt like hours, until Maxwell pointed out a possible exit from the stream. The forest here looked thicker, darker, with no sign of the pursuers. Daniela nodded, and they climbed onto the bank. Her boots squished with each step. The adrenaline in her bloodstream started wearing off, replaced by exhaustion. She looked around for any sign of a road. The glow of the lake was to their left, meaning they'd traveled a decent distance from the cabin. "Let's try to find the main road," Daniela said quietly. "If we can get to a town or somewhere with cell reception." A snarl cut her off. A figure emerged from the darkness, pistol raised. He wore black tactical gear, with a Lynx protection patch on his chest. Another man flanked him, similarly armed. "Don't move," the first one growled. Daniela froze, Ebony gasped, Maxwell swore under his breath. One mercenary stepped closer, eyes on Ebony's laptop case. "Hand it over." Daniela's gaze flicked to Maxwell. She recognized the fear in his eyes. With 2 guns trained on them at close range, the odds were terrible. But the men seemed interested in the laptop. Maybe that was a chance to distract them. "You want this?" Daniela asked, lifting the bag slightly. "It's worthless. Just some worthless files." "No." The second mercenary barked a laugh. "Worthless? Try again, soldier. Pierce knows exactly what's in there." Time seemed to slow. Daniela's training surfaced. Disarm technique. 2 attackers. Tight space. Both men had guns aimed, but, maybe for a split second, she could act. She locked eyes with Ebony, then Maxwell, mentally telling them to be ready. The first mercenary gestured with his pistol. "Move away from the girl. Let her bring the bag." A twig snapped to their left. Another figure appeared. Detective Benton from the station, wearing plain clothes but holding a sidearm. "I'll handle this," he sneered. "Pierce wants Ebony alive. The rest are optional." Benton advanced, grinning at Daniela. "Told you Bellhaven has its own ways, Sergeant. Drop the bag, step aside, and maybe I'll let you walk away. Grandma can rot in prison, though." A hot fury seared Daniela's veins. Benton turned his gun on Ebony, who stiffened. "Hand it over," he ordered. Daniela feigned compliance, lowering the bag, but in a flash she pivoted, lunging for the first mercenary's wrist, driving his gun hand aside. The shot rang out, echoing across the forest. She twisted his arm, dropping him to his knees. The second mercenary fired, missing Ebony by inches. Maxwell tackled that man from behind, fists flying. Ebony ducked, hugging the laptop case. Benton cursed, stepping back to avoid the tangle, then aimed at Daniela. She used the mercenary's body as partial cover, heart pounding, every nerve honed from years of close combat. She slammed the mercenary's face into the ground, his weapon clattering away. Benton fired. The bullet grazed Daniela's shoulder, a searing pain erupting, but she clenched her teeth, refusing to stop. She grabbed the first mercenary's dropped pistol, rolled sideways and returned fire at Benton. A single shot. Benton cried out, dropping his gun, clutching a wound in his forearm. Maxwell wrestled the second mercenary, who was surprisingly strong. Ebony scrambled away, clinging to the laptop. The mercenary shoved Maxwell off, raising his sidearm. Daniela, despite the throbbing pain in her shoulder, aimed. She fired twice. The second mercenary dropped to the ground with a grunt. Silence fell, broken only by Benton's pained groans. The first mercenary was unconscious, the second severely wounded, and Benton sat on the ground, blood pooling from his arm. Ebony covered her mouth, tears streaming. Danielle approached Benton, keeping the gun trained on him. "You messed with the wrong family." He spat out a curse, breath ragged. "You have no idea what Pierce will do." She pressed her boot on his uninjured shoulder, pinning him to the ground. Maxwell rushed to Ebony, checking if she was hurt. Then he retrieved the phone from Benton's pocket. "No signal, but maybe we can fix that soon." "We have to get out of here," Daniela said. "Others might have heard the shots." Maxwell nodded, stepping around Benton. "I'll call the local hospital anonymously after we're clear. You sure you don't want to just turn them in?" Daniela snorted softly. "Turn them into who? The sheriff who's on Pierce's payroll? They'll walk. Ebony's evidence is the only thing that can bring real justice." She took the laptop from Ebony carefully, cradling her wounded shoulder. "We need to find a safe place with phone reception. Then we contact the feds." Ebony wept softly, but she nodded in agreement. "I'm so sorry about your shoulder." "I've had worse," Daniela murmured. "Let's move." They left Benton cursing on the ground, the unconscious mercenary moaning, and the other mercenary bleeding but alive. Not exactly a fair fight, but they had no time to do more. They melted into the forest, adrenaline pushing them on. Miles later, they found a service road and flagged down a passing trucker, who, after seeing Daniela's condition, reluctantly agreed to drive them to a nearby rest stop. There, Maxwell finally got enough bars on his phone to make calls. First call, 911, to report an incident near Lake Bowman. He gave minimal details. Second call, Captain Valerie Myers at the Pentagon, patched through to Daniela's phone, on speaker as Ebony prepared to upload her files. With Captain Myers guiding them, they sent the entire trove of evidence to a secure Department of Justice email. Then, Myers promised to forward it to the FBI's Corruption Task Force. "It'll take a few days to get official traction," Myers warned. "But with these kinds of documents, we should see federal agents in Bellhaven soon. Hang tight, and let me know if you need anything else." Daniela ended the call, relief surging despite the pain throbbing in her shoulder. Ebony's evidence was out there, unstoppable now. Pierce could no longer bury it. Early the next morning, Daniela, Ebony, and Maxwell gathered at Lisa Monroe's small law office. Lisa stared at Ebony's files in awe. "This is it. Emails, voice memos, financial ledgers. We can free Ms. Ross, along with plenty of others who've been railroaded." Maxwell cracked his knuckles. "I sent a message to some state colleagues I trust. They'll keep the local force from interfering too much. And with the FBI en route, Pierce's empire is on borrowed time." They updated Ebony's protective status with the DOJ. Ebony insisted on testifying in person, but wanted her family relocated for safety. Lisa promised to help arrange it. As the sun crept higher, news broke across local stations. A shootout near Lake Bowman involving unknown assailants and a detective. Benton was found wounded, spouting half-baked accusations. The PD claimed they were investigating. Word spread that Ebony Warner had surfaced with explosive allegations. Within hours, the judge scheduled an emergency hearing for Loretta Ross, forced by the sudden swirl of revelations. Daniela and Lisa headed to the courthouse, Ebony at their side, clutching the laptop. They entered the building to find camera crews, reporters shouting questions. The story had gone viral. Corrupt developers' scheme exposed by Army sergeants daring rescue. Something about the David and Goliath angle caught national attention. Inside, they took seats in the worn-down courtroom. Judge Hamilton presided with a sour expression. The district attorney, a trembling middle-aged man, stood up to present the state's request. In light of new evidence contradicting the allegations against Ms. Loretta Ross, we move to dismiss all charges immediately. A ripple of gasps swept through the spectators. Loretta, escorted into the courtroom in a prison jumpsuit, looked frail but resolute. She locked eyes with Daniela. Judge Hamilton cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "The court agrees to drop the charges, pending further inquiry. Ms. Ross, you are free to go." Applause erupted from the gallery, stifled only by the gavel's bang. Loretta exhaled in relief, tears glinting. The bailiff uncuffed her. She stepped out, and Daniela rushed forward to wrap her arms around her grandmother. "It's over, Grandma," she whispered. Loretta gave a watery smile. "Not quite. Pierce still has his claws in this town, but at least I'm free. Lisa guided them out of the courtroom, Ebony close behind. Outside, cameras flashed, and reporters thrust microphones forward. Loretta shielded her eyes, leaning on Daniela for support. "What happens next for the farmland? The allegations of corruption?" a reporter hollered. Daniela set her jaw. "We have evidence that Pierce orchestrated a wide-ranging scheme to steal land, bribe officials, and frame innocent people. The FBI is on their way. Justice will be served." Then she added, voice resolute, "And if anyone else has been intimidated by Pierce, come forward. We'll stand with you." The crowd parted as they made their way down the steps. Off to the side, Detective Maxwell looked on, giving them a respectful nod. He mouthed, "Well done," and Daniela returned a brief smile. Within days, the scandal engulfed Belhaven. Pierce's accounts were frozen, his business offices raided by federal agents. Photos of him in handcuffs, escorted by suits from the DOJ, hit the local news. Even the local sheriff found himself under investigation for accepting bribes. Sergeant Benton, indicted for attempted murder and conspiracy, squawked about being a scapegoat. The entire power structure that had once felt unshakable was crumbling. With Pierce's empire toppling, many families who lost their land began to file lawsuits. Lisa Monroe led a coalition of lawyers, including big names from the state capitol, to challenge every shady transaction. Loretta Ross, though tired, offered her historical expertise, combing the library's archives to restore the rightful deeds. Meanwhile, Ebony testified to a grand jury, presenting the files that confirmed Pierce's orchestrated criminal enterprise. Despite her fears, she stood firm, bolstered by Daniela's presence in the courtroom gallery. Ebony's bravery became a rallying cry for others to expose corruption. During that period, Loretta recovered at home while neighbors and church members brought hot meals, expressing gratitude. She'd become a symbol of quiet defiance, a 71-year-old librarian who refused to let her community's legacy be bulldozed for profit. Standing on her porch, Daniela marveled at how many people dropped by, hugging Loretta, calling her a hero. But the soldier in Daniela knew the battle wasn't over. She hovered protectively, scanning for any sign of leftover Pierce loyalists, especially from Link's protection. For a while, the tension remained. A few suspicious vehicles circled Loretta's block, but the FBI was watching too, and the intimidation soon fizzled. Late one afternoon, after Loretta had finally changed out of her jail jumpsuit and into a simple floral dress, she and Daniela sat on the porch swing, sipping sweet tea. A warm breeze rustled the old oak tree overhead. The serenity felt surreal after the chaos. "Sometimes I wonder," Loretta mused, "what your parents would think of this. They moved away years ago to find better opportunities, left me here to keep the library going, and now you, my brave granddaughter, risked everything to protect me." Daniela swallowed hard. "I did what any granddaughter would do. You taught me principles, taught me to stand up when something's wrong." A tear slid down Loretta's cheek. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become." They held hands, the moment too full for more words. The next day, a community rally took place at the old farmland behind the library. People set up tables with petitions, hot dogs, and a makeshift stage. Ebony, Lisa, Maxwell, and many locals gathered. The library's board announced plans to convert part of the land into a historical site, commemorating the black families who founded Belhaven. They invited Loretta to speak. She stepped onto the stage, Daniela close behind, scanning the crowd. The news cameras lingered. Federal agents were in attendance too, verifying the authenticity of the recovered deeds. Loretta took the mic, voice trembling at first. This farmland belonged to families who tilled the soil, built homes, and shaped our town's heritage. Alexander Pierce tried to erase that history for his profit, but thanks to brave souls like my granddaughter, Sergeant Ross, Detective Maxwell, Ebony Warner, Lisa Monroe, and all of you who refused to be silent, we have reclaimed it. This land is our story, and no one, no matter how rich or powerful, can take that away again. Thunderous applause rose, Daniela watched Ebony's eyes shine with tears. She spotted Marta Ellis near the front, cheering loudly, next to a group of local teens who once saw Belhaven as hopeless. Now hope felt tangible. After the rally, a reporter approached Daniela for an on-camera interview. She hesitated. She'd never been one for media attention. But a quiet nudge from Loretta convinced her. "What lesson do you want people to take from all this?" the reporter asked, microphone extended. Daniela paused, then spoke from her heart. "That injustice thrives on our silence. When one person dares to speak the truth, it might seem futile. But when a community stands together, elders, lawyers, whistleblowers, honest cops, they become unstoppable. Yes, it's scary to fight corruption, but it's scarier to let it grow." Her words resonated, and the broadcast spread even beyond Belhaven. Other towns battling similar land grabs reached out for guidance. Some invited Loretta to speak about historic preservation. Others asked Ebony to share her whistleblowing story. Lisa gained a reputation as a formidable advocate for the disenfranchised. Detective Maxwell, once overlooked, received commendations from the State Bureau. With the trial of Alexander Pierce looming, media vans regularly lined Belhaven's streets. The courthouse steps became a stage for daily commentary. Pierce, no longer smug, arrived in shackles, flanked by his high-powered attorneys. The charges ranged from fraud and bribery to conspiracy and attempted murder. Prosecutors had Ebony's testimony, the stolen documents, plus internal emails implicating half a dozen local officials. He was done. The day the guilty verdict came in, the entire town seemed to exhale. Bells chimed from the church tower. People embraced on the sidewalks. Loretta attended the sentencing hearing, holding Daniela's hand. The judge, brought in from a different county to avoid conflicts of interest, delivered a stinging rebuke before sentencing Pierce to a lengthy prison term. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse. The next morning, national news outlets ran the headline, "Corrupt Developer Brought to Justice by Army Sergeant and Librarian Grandmother." The story of Belhaven captured hearts across America. Some called it a modern David versus Goliath tale, an underdog victory that proved the power of unity. That evening a celebration took place at Marta's Diner. The place overflowed with well-wishers. Loretta, Ebony, Lisa, Maxwell, even some federal agents joined for a plate of fried chicken and laughter. The jukebox played old Motown hits. Marta insisted on giving everyone free pie, apple, peach, sweet potato. Daniela sat in a corner booth, exhaustion and relief mingling, as she watched Ebony grin for the first time in weeks, Maxwell joking with a reporter, Loretta hugging half the crowd. The tension that had weighed on Belhaven's shoulders had finally lifted. Lisa slid into the booth beside Daniela, a grin stretching across her face. "I heard from the city council. They want you to accept a Citizen's Medal of Honor at next month's ceremony." Daniela chuckled. "I'm just glad Grandma's safe." Lisa touched her arm gently. "You realize you did more than save your grandmother, right? You saved an entire community's heritage." Daniela looked around the bustling diner, people of all ages, backgrounds, colors, celebrating together. She thought of the war-torn places she'd served, where hope felt so distant. Here, hope lived in every smiling face. She nodded, voice thick with emotion. "Maybe we all saved it together." A ring from her phone interrupted the moment. She glanced at the screen, recognized her commanding officer's number. Time to check in, see if her official leave was ending soon. She sighed. Duty calls. She stepped outside into the warm twilight, phone to her ear. The conversation was brief. The Army needed her back. A new assignment was waiting. She knew this day would come. She was a soldier after all. At dawn, she returned to Loretta's porch to say a quiet goodbye. Ebony and Lisa were there too, the sun illuminating the newly blossomed magnolias. Loretta pressed a small leather-bound book into Daniele's hands. "I found this among the library records. An old journal from your great-grandmother. It's a piece of family history we almost lost. Take it with you, keep it safe." Daniela gently traced the worn cover. "Thank you, Grandma." Ebony gave her a timid hug. "Stay safe out there, Sergeant. Thank you for everything." Lisa added, "I'll keep you updated on any legal developments. Don't worry about Bellhaven. We've got this." Daniela smiled, her heart full. "I know you do. I'll be back to visit. This place, it's home." She loaded her bag into a borrowed car, the final gift from Marta. A ride to the nearest airport, courtesy of one of the diner's staff. Before she climbed in, she turned to Loretta once more. They embraced, tears slipping down both their cheeks. "Don't let anyone bully you again," Daniela whispered. Loretta laughed softly. "You kidding, child? I'm unstoppable now." With that, Daniela slid into the car. As it pulled away, she watched Loretta wave from the porch, Ebony and Lisa beside her. The iconic image lingered. 3 strong black women, safeguarding a legacy that no developer could ever destroy. On the flight back to her base, Daniela flipped through her great-grandmother's journal, reading entries about building a home with her own hands, about the joys and struggles of being a black pioneer in a segregated world, about the dream that one day their descendants could stand tall. Daniela realized that dream had come to pass through her grandmother's resilience and her own unwavering commitment to justice. When she landed, her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, gratitude, updates from Bellhaven's continuing transformation. She felt a surge of pride, but also a pang of longing to be there in person. Duty, however, called again, and she would answer it, carrying Bellhaven's story as proof that no matter how powerful the oppressor, a community's collective spirit can prevail. Those who heard the tale asked, "Would you risk everything to protect a small hometown that you left behind?" Daniela's answer was simple. Yes, because the roots of identity and history run deeper than money or fear. And if she learned one lesson from Loretta, it's that justice doesn't just happen. It's made, every day, by those brave enough to speak truth in the face of intimidation. She smiled, recalling something her grandmother often said, "Child, a good book never truly ends. It continues in the hearts and minds of the readers, weaving threads of hope into every future they touch." And so, the story of Bellhaven wasn't an ending, it was a new beginning, for all who dared to stand up for what was right. As for the grand lessons left behind, they were many. That family isn't limited by blood but by shared resolve. That the silent are not powerless, they're simply waiting for the right moment to speak. That those who claim they stand for progress but rely on lies and intimidation aren't visionaries but tyrants. And most importantly, that true heroes aren't always the ones in uniforms or suits. They can be librarians, whistleblowers, neighbors with a kind word, or a soldier coming home to defend her grandmother. People still gather at Marta's diner, sharing these lessons like precious heirlooms. They quote the wise words Loretta once scribbled in the margins of an old library ledger. "Injustice is an avalanche. If enough people stand together, they can stop it in its tracks." Those words resonate with anyone aged 25 to 45 who's ever felt overshadowed by corruption or corporate greed. They remind us that our voices matter, our bonds matter, and when we unite around truth, even the most fortified strongholds of power can crumble. And that, my friends, is how Bellhaven reclaimed its story, proving once again that sometimes the quietest voice, when joined by many others, can become a roar that shakes the foundations of injustice and sets an entire town free.